I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us, a multi-time best-selling author, internationally best-selling author. This is one of his first of 15 books. Huge, multi-million copies sold globally. Huge of story. Of course, I'm kind of giving it away. It's Daniel Estulin. His latest book is In the Shadows of a President. Only been out about 5 months or so, on its way to being a bestseller in multiple places around the globe. Daniel Estulin is an expert in intelligence. He worked for the Russians for 24 years. He's an expert on the Bilderberg, as he's written a huge best-selling book. Let's bring him on. Daniel Estulin, thank you for joining us today at USAWatchdog.com from Toronto.
It's wonderful to be back on your show. I remember the first time we talked about Bilderberg way back when. And
that's right. You were overseas.
Exactly. Thank you so much for having me again.
Love having you. Listen, I went through the book, so I have all these. This is not coming in the book. This is me reading it and going through it. Listen, a fantastic read. I mean, I just wanted some of the notes when I read the book I want to talk about this too. This is $250 trillion in the world. When you wrote the book, I think you had it at 217. It's now almost 250 trillion.
Yeah.
$2 quadrillion budget. But you talk about GCHQ and the spying on Trump and the CIA versus the NSA, WikiLeaks, Soros, black budget, Goldman Sachs, Macron being the new Napoleon, and I want to fast forward, so I can't get everything in the book. So you all are going to have to go on. There'll be a book buying page at the end. I get nothing for this, but it's a fascinating book. You'll have to do that. I want to fast forward to the global reset, and one of the things that you say in this book about the reset is the next war will not be nuclear. We may have war because, as you said in the pre-interview, it wipes out deaths. But it's going to be economic, and you think that the whole global economy has fallen on its head already. Could you tell us about the next war is not going to be a nuclear war, but yet economic, and you think we're in the middle of it now?
Okay. Well, before we start, since the last time we spoke, Greg, now I'm a doctor of conceptual intelligence. In other words, what we do in our little group of people who work for Russian intelligence is we create models that basically explain and define the future of humanity 2 generations ahead, which is about 50 years. Which is why when you're talking about next war, the thing is about wars is wars write off debts and responsibilities, and because we have this quadrillion, be it 2, be it 3, be it 4, it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. You can't pay that off. Dollar global debt. One of the ways to get rid of it is via global thermonuclear war, which is why for the elite circles, they love the Middle East because you have the Jews and the Israelis on the one side, and you have Arabs and oil on the other. I mean, you can't think of a better combination. But
for a war.
For any conflict.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
But to understand what's happening, because this morning I kind of very quickly went through just the headlines of some of the things going on around the world. You have conflict, you have strife, you have wars, you have economic wars, you have manifestations, you have possible coup d'etats in different parts of the world. But what people have to understand is that Donald Trump, or what we're seeing right now globally, is not a fight between the liberals and the conservatives, or the Republicans and the Democrats, or the socialists and the capitalists. What we're seeing right now is collapse of Bretton Woods economic model. And Donald Trump is simply the consequence of this global collapse. Now, let me go back a little bit because it's important for people to understand. Back in, it was November 4th or November 5th, I can't remember, 2014, it was the last midterm elections. We were in Dayton, Ohio, the Dartmouth Conference. Now, Dartmouth is a very, very important conference. It started back in the early 1960s as a way for the Soviets and the Americans to kind of have, their face-to-face time, make sure that they iron things out because, you don't want the 2 superpowers not to understand each other with nuclear warheads and global survival at stake. And luckily, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, Dartmouth maintained, certain gravitas globally. And so in 2014, it was the day after the midterm elections, we were sitting around with American delegates, and we explained to them, we meaning, a small group of the Russian representatives, again, based on the models of the future we created, that the next president in 2016, because again, it was midterm, everybody was talking about the Republicans winning, big win in midterm elections. And needless to say, everybody was looking forward to the 2016 elections. And we explained to them that the next president of the United States is not going to be Hillary Clinton or anybody in any form linked, related to the liberal banking financiers. It's going to be someone, and we told them it's going to be someone like Donald Trump or someone in his mold. It was, again, remember, that was 7 or 8 months before Donald Trump appeared on the scene, because when we explained that to them in November, nobody even thought of Donald Trump running for presidency. So we gave them 3 options. We thought, someone like Trump was a right-wing conservative. We thought maybe someone like Rand Paul, who didn't have the business acumen, but he had obviously the political know-how. But then we crossed him off the list because, again, he didn't have the business acumen. And then the other candidate on the other side of the spectrum, so if Trump is right-wing conservative, we thought of left liberal, that would be Bernie Sanders. And we thought that Sanders could win, and he would have won had it not been for all the stuff that happened within the Democratic caucus. But in the end, he lost and Trump won. And what Donald Trump represents, he represents a change of order. Because again, if you kind of go back historically, and I want to do this very quickly, and it's important, because in the United States or globally, 99.9% of people, I don't care if they're economists or otherwise, they don't understand this. If in the 19th century you had 4 economic models, you had the British, you had the Prussian or the German after the war with France in 1870, you had the American at the end of the 19th century, and then you had the Japanese after the war with Russia in 1904 and 1905. Then at the end of World War II, beginning with Bretton Woods, you were only left with 2 economic models, a Western capitalist model and Soviet socialist and their satellites. And these 2 models, they coexisted fairly well between 1944 and 1991. In some things, the United States or the capitalist model was better. In other things, socially speaking, et cetera, et cetera. The Soviet model was better. Demographically, they were, fairly on par, although the Soviet Union had about 300 million people in the United States, I think at the time 220. But again, they coexisted well until 1991, when the Soviet system collapsed. Now, it didn't collapse because socialism was inferior. This is far beyond the scope of this interview. But the point is, the 2 systems, they merged into one global liberal banking financier parasitical order. And now, after the collapse in 2008 of the Lehman Brothers, we've reached the limits to growth. Because something that Karl Marx and Adam Smith understood way back when, is there's going to come a time where you're going to reach limits on growth on a planet Earth, which is a limited, finite space with limited natural resources. And so in 2008, okay, it was apparent if in year 2000, with the collapse of the dot-com bubble, and in 2008 with the Lehman Brothers collapse, the banking financier elite, they understood that their model can go no longer. Now, when we're talking about the different models, it's important to understand another thing, that I don't make a difference between the Republicans and the Democrats. It's not the fight between Hillary Clinton on the one hand and Donald Trump on the other, or any one of the future representatives, because both parties, not only in the United States, but in Canada, in Europe, and globally, they represent the same liberal banking financier Wall Street parasitical order. Now, what I mean by that is, if democracy is the rule by the Democrats, liberalism, not in its purest form, but today's liberalism, is control of society by the banking elite. And so, again, if you go back to the last elections, the Bushes, they voted for Hillary Clinton. And so what we explained to the Americans at the Dartmouth conference in 2014 was that the 2016 elections was to be drastically different from any previous elections, because for the first time in many decades, the contenders represented 2 completely divergent models rather than slightly varying versions of the same economic model. Now, until 2008, for the alternative group, because again, if you look at Hillary Clinton, and I'm not saying Democrats, I don't want to use that word, because it's a liberal banking financier global order, and that's why Trump is fighting, Canadian Prime Minister. That's why he's up against G7. That's why he's up against World Trade Organization, European Central Bank, International Monetary Fund, the Prime Minister of England, the Chancellor of Germany, et cetera, et cetera. All these alleged, historical friends of the United States are now his enemies. And people are saying Trump is insane. He's not insane, because all of these leaders globally, and it doesn't matter whether they're liberals, conservatives, socialists, Democrats, Republicans, it doesn't matter. All of them globally in the Western world represent liberal banking financier order. And so if until 1991, the fight was between the socialist Soviet model and capitalist Western, with the collapse or the merger of the two systems in 1991, and then the first collapse of the global model, beginning with the dot-com bubble in the year 2000. Today, the fight is within the capitalist bloc, between the liberal banking financiers, Wall Street, the parasitical people who play with numbers on a computer, on the one hand, and the industrialists and isolationists on the other. And until the year 2008, the alternative group, the people who put forward Trump's candidacy, because again, Trump is not a person. I don't mean by that he's some extraterrestrial from Mars. He is a representative of an alternative group of the elite circles. Trump is not even the United States, because the United States today continues to be under the control of the liberal banking financiers, which is why Trump, allegedly the most powerful person in the world, is having as much trouble as he is, and he's surrounded by traitors, because his enemies are Wall Street, Washington's bureaucracy, the intelligence agencies, Hollywood, Silicon Valley, the Rockefeller crowd, the Soroses, the mainstream media, all of these people, and needless to say, the entire Washington bureaucracy, because for the last three
and the mainstream media, let's throw that in there.
I just said that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, for the past 3 generations since 1944, the entire system, and by that I mean the bureaucracy, be it London School of Economics, Wharton School of Business, be it think tanks, foundations, ratings agencies, all of these organizations, they've been part of this liberal banking order, not only in the United States, but globally. And Trump's job as the representative of an alternative, isolationist industrial group is to dismantle this. Because again, I explained who was behind Hillary Clinton. But I again want to emphasize, it's not between the Republicans and the Democrats.
Gotcha.
The Bushes voted for Clinton. It's the global financial model. Behind Donald Trump, you have European aristocracy. You have the British royal family. You have the Rothschilds. Okay? You have the Vatican. You can call this group Black International, blood and soil. Okay? Because Trump, again, half Scot, half German. These are the old royal families, the old landowners, and the Vatican in this case, they're the managers of all this land, which these people have owned for 1,000 years. Again, it's a very different take. But again, I want to make sure people remember, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm someone who spent 24 years in Russian military counterintelligence, and I'm also a doctor of conceptual intelligence, which means we, from a point of view of a satellite, take in everything that happens on the planet Earth, and we create models that define the future of humanity 2 generations, at least 1 or 2 generations in advance.
So you said that they knew the banking financiers, the liberal banking financiers, the makers and the takers. The takers are the bankers, the hedge funds. The makers are the guys that build stuff, the industrialists, the people that own land. Makers, takers. Is that right?
I guess you could call it, but again, people are going to go back to the terminology that they're familiar with. You have the bankers and the people, or the bankers, and the freedom-loving patriots. Again, globally speaking, the presidents and the prime ministers don't really have a lot of power. You know that. We've talked about this before. You've interviewed, my good friend Catherine Austin Fitz. We understand how the system is run. These are the caretakers, the faces you see for the global supranational level elite. Now, what had happened after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Western world got a new lease on life for about a quarter century. because in 1981, they realized, actually, they realized it in the 1970s, that their model was not going to survive as long as the fight with the Soviet Union because they needed the territory, the markets. Okay? And so in the 1980s, they made this desperate attempt to try to conquer the Soviet space. Now, if in the 1950s and the 1960s, the Soviet nomenclature, the people who ran the country, people who fought and won World War II, they absolutely knew that they would win this conflict with the capitalist West, which they were winning in the 1960s. The next generation who didn't fight in the war, they absolutely knew that they couldn't win. And what had happened was, in the 1980s, with the changing of the guard with Gorbachev, and even before him, okay, what had happened was the Soviet leadership, they understood that the best way for them to get along was to dismantle the Soviet Union, because you see, in the Soviet Union, everybody owned, we were all owners of our country. And no matter how powerful a bureaucrat was, and in a lot of cases they were more powerful than any American billionaire, once they were dead, their children didn't get anything because of everybody's. And the only way they could actually have private property and get something when they were dead for their families and for their offsprings is to dismantle the country and merge it with the West. Okay? Then we know what happened. Again, this is not the place or the time. It's a very long and complicated story. But it's important to understand that the West got a new lease on life in the 1980s when they were able to conquer Soviet space. And they lived for another 25 years at the expense of Soviet Union and Soviet satellites. But now it's over, and you have nowhere to expand because we've reached the limits to growth. And what you're seeing globally, and not only in the United States, you see it in Canada, you see it in Latin America, you see it in Central America, you see it in Europe. I mean, you see it in England, you see it in France, you see it in Germany, you see it in Spain, you see it in Italy, you see it in Russia, you see it in China, you see it in the Middle East. I don't get, except for Fiji, a great place to visit, by the way, okay, if you're a tourist. Anywhere else on the planet, you are seeing the collapse of the global order. And it's a question is because the problem is the Bretton Woods model is now dead. And so the global elite circles, they're in a situation where there's before they could sit down at this global, power table, okay, metaphorical table, and kind of divvy up the world between them. Today, there's not enough for everybody. So, like in the film, the Highlander, only one can survive. And what we're seeing is right now is the fight to the death. Because again, if the liberals control the world by the bankers, okay, and what we're seeing right now globally is the collapse of that model. And the problem is, as long as the liberals were able to print money, because that's what it's all about, the liberals in the United States, the liberal banking financier elite, they lost access to the printing machine that prints money, okay, to the emission center. And that's something I also explain in my book. I don't know if you had a chance to, to get to that part. But what I explain is that Donald Trump is the continuation of Barack Obama's second-term economic policy. Now, I'm going to repeat this because I'm sure a lot of people are doing a double take right now. Donald Trump is the continuation of Barack Obama's economic policy, and if you permit me, I'll explain it in 2 minutes.
Well, he did turbocharge the markets, I think, to buy time. He did.
The thing is actually, you can go back a little bit before that. Do you remember the whole story with sordid episode with Dominique Strauss-Kahn?
Yeah. He was, accused of raping some maid in the hotel room, and don't know if he did it or not, but he was ejected from the IMF.
Is, because again, I am a doctor of conceptual intelligence, and I've been in counterintelligence for a long time. So it doesn't matter the noise you hear on television; it's irrelevant. Turn off the volume and just watch the images. Dominique Strauss-Kahn is a representative of a very powerful, one of the oldest families in Europe, the St. Clairs. Now, if you ever read the Da Vinci Code, and I'm not promoting that book, but if you ever read the Da Vinci Code, they talk about the St. Clairs, having, the line going back to Jesus Christ, etc. One of the oldest families, powerful families, aristocratic families in Europe. This is the guy who was the president of International Monetary Fund. What had happened was In 2008, the global elite circles, they realized that their model was about to end. And what they needed desperately to do is get their grubby little hands on the America's emission center, which means the American dollar. There's a lot of communication going back and forth between, European Central Bank, International Monetary Fund, financial institutions, global financial institutions, and the people in the United States from the Federal Reserve and a lot of important politicians. They reached an agreement to hand over the power of the emission of the US dollar to the global elite via Bank of International Settlement, which is central bank of central banks. The whole thing was already arranged. The only thing was needed was Obama to sign off on this deal. Nobody knows about this. But Obama decided he's not going to do that. He's not going to let the global elite circles control the emission of the US dollar. And jailing, creating this story, and we don't know if it's true, whether he raped or not, this woman of lowered social standing. Let's not call her a prostitute, okay? We don't know. It doesn't really matter. But if you kind of go back to the images of Dominique Strauss-Kahn, I suggest people do, so they can understand how things work behind the scenes, and they watch him in court, this is one of the most powerful men in the world. Okay, he's this big fat slob, but he's one of the most powerful men in the world, one of the oldest European families, sitting there not understanding what's going on because, again, the elite circles, the royalty and the aristocracy, they don't follow the same rules as the rest of the mortals. They can kill people with impunity, basically, as a lot of them have done. Now, the point is, by doing that, what Barack Obama did is she showed the global bankers that the control of the US dollar stays in the United States. Then, if you remember, the next year, for the first time since Reaganomics in 1981, Obama eliminates from his economic council all the globalist members from Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. Then in 2014, he stops quantitative easing. And in 2016, you have Brexit and Donald Trump. So again, go back to what I said before. Donald Trump is the continuation of Barack Obama's second-term economic policy.
Go ahead.
What we're seeing right now, just to summarize this, is we're seeing the fight. What it's all about, a fight for the control of emission of US dollar. Liberals, unless they get their grubby hands on the emission, meaning the printing machine that prints US dollars, they're toast. And toast today means probably dead. Because again, if you kind of look at the numbers, between 1981, Reaganomics, and today, if you take out of the equation all the money printed in the United States, because between 2008 and 2014, they printed $2.5 trillion. But if you take all the money out of this equation between 81 and now, real growth in the United States is 0%. Zero. So they understand that the guy who is in charge right now in Washington is the enemy, not of ideological enemy. It has nothing to do with his eating habits, whether, he burps when he eats, he picks his nose, whether he sleeps with somebody who does, unfathomable things in Moscow hotel room. You shouldn't do these things in a hotel room. If you do, you shouldn't do that. But anyway, the point is, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the fact that the global liberal banking elite circles, which is global, not only in the United States, they understand that unless they can get rid of Donald Trump. And the same goes for Putin in Russia, because Putin is not a communist. Putin is a right-wing conservative like Donald Trump. Globally, as far as the foreign policy is concerned, and nationally, he is hard liberal. But he's certainly not a communist. And unless they can get rid of Donald Trump, they're toast. And that's what the fight is about right now in America. And that's why you have all the screaming and yelling in the media. I've never seen, I don't think there's ever been a case in the history of the United States where a president would get as much flack as Donald Trump. I'm not defending him. People say, so you're pro-Donald Trump. I can't be pro-Donald Trump. I'm not against him either. But I can't be for him because I'm Russian.
Yeah, I got it. I understand that.
I look at Trump as
you want Russia. You said that if the Trump, you're hoping that he wins, because you said in another interview, you said, listen, I'm hoping he wins because if he doesn't win, then Russia will be dismantled.
The problem with Russia, that's again something that people don't understand. Russia is not the Soviet Union. We don't have the reach, economic, financial, political, or military. We're a fraction of what the Soviet Union was. In other words, thinking of Russia equals superpower, it's absolute nonsense. Just to give you an idea economically, Russia's for economic financial policy is written in the offices of International Monetary Fund. It's like, imagine this: America's economic policy is written, by the people in the International Monetary Fund.
Yeah.
Russia's director of Russia's central bank would be like, Powell of the Federal Reserve, has no responsibility to Russia. If the President Putin calls her, she has no responsibility to answer and do what he tells her. She works directly for Christine Lagarde, the General Director of International Monetary Fund. You're not allowed to make investments in rubles in Russia. You can only do it in dollars. Just to give you an idea who controls Russia's economy. So,
wow.
Because again, it's under the control of the liberal banking financier, right? And people always say to me, well, this is stupid. If this is the case, why doesn't Putin just fire and put somebody who's a patriot? He can't do it for the same reason that Trump can't get rid of Powell. You see, what would happen is, so people understand how it works. If Putin tomorrow decides to fire Nabiullina, who lost over $4 billion, lost. She didn't lose. She just gave it to the liberal banking financiers through bad investments. That should be enough to cut her head off.
Yeah.
But the point is, if he fired Nabiullina, the director of central bank, and replaced her with somebody who's a patriot, immediately International Monetary Fund and the ratings agencies would emit a report, and this report would say, according to our best practices and knowledge, the person who is running Russia's central bank is absolutely incompetent. As a result of that, they're going to lower Russia's credit to junk. And because private corporations cannot have a higher credit rating than the government itself, every Russian company's credit rating will be lowered to junk, which means Russian economy would collapse in a matter of hours, which is why until the liberal banking financier global order is not dismantled, Putin has his hands tied. And the same with Trump, and that's what we're seeing right now globally. The liberals have no way to guarantee growth globally. And what they're fighting right now is for survival. And Trump, we in Russia need Donald Trump a lot more than Donald Trump needs Russia. Because Trump needs global allies. And all the stuff that Trump works for Putin, it's all liberal garbage. Because again, both Trump and Putin, they're right-wing conservatives globally. And what you're seeing right now is the fight to get rid of these people. Because if Trump goes and they impeach him, or he dies, or he disappears, and the extraterrestrials, take him back to the moon, okay, and somebody else comes in who is a liberal banking financier, then the liberal global establishment, who today are fighting to the death against Donald Trump, will focus all their power and all their strength and artillery, against the dismantling of Russia. Because Russia right now, there's different ways it could go as a country. One way we could go with Europe, which is what you would call a Moscow third Rome. First Rome is, of course, the Vatican and St. Peter. Second Rome was Byzantine Empire and Constantinople. And the third will be Russia working with Western Europe. Liberalism, meaning dismantling of the country. The second option, Russia staying like USSR 2, which would again mean the same as before, but worse, because the collapse of global emission center is now, we're seeing it right in front of us. And the third option, and that's the most viable option, is the Genghis Khan Empire 3, because the first one was Genghis Khan, the second was the Union, China and the Soviet Union during the period Stalin and Mao Zedong, which was a carbon copy of Genghis Khan's empire. And this will be the third go at it, where you have the Russians, the Chinese, Kazakhstan and Mongolia recreating that union. And that's one of the possibilities today, but the problem is that China is not Russia's friend.
Again, China is not. No, they are not Russia's friend.
And a lot
they would stab Russia in the back in a heartbeat.
Absolutely, because again, the thing is that you see, the Chinese and the Americans, back in 1979, signed a secret agreement between Deng Xiaoping and Jimmy Carter. And it was a 20-year agreement, extended another 20 years by, Bill Clinton, and then extended another 2 years to the year 2021. And this agreement is a uh, 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 um, what's it called?
Non-aggression.
Non-aggression, exactly, for the next 41 years.
Wow.
An agreement signed between Deng Xiaoping and Jimmy Carter. So all this talk about the Chinese being Russia's friends and we love you and we care for you and we're there with you. Remember, Crimea, the Chinese never recognized it. In Syria, they're saying, you do what you have to do, just keep us out of it. In Central Asia, the same thing. So the Chinese are working with the United States. But the problem is which United States? Because the United States
Yeah.
is not a homogenous country. You have a civil war in the United States. There is the liberal banking financier United States, the parasites who play with numbers, don't produce anything at all, and then you have the alternative group, the people who put Donald Trump, and push them through to the presidency, the isolationists and the industrialists.
Oh,
Right?
Could we have a market? Is gold going to ease its way back in? Could Donald? I'm going to ask you a few questions in a row and just give your spattering of whatever. Could we have a new dollar? Could they get rid of the Federal Reserve note? Is that a possibility or not?
Again, what's this? What's the solution to the crisis? Because, and again, Catherine Austin Fitz, she talks about this, global 1.0, which is, Westphalia 1648 to the late 1960s,
Yeah.
global, and then in the Bilderberg conference in Mont-Tremblant on the outskirts of Montreal in 1968, they talked about creating a one world company limited, corporations that have a lot more power than any government on the planet. She calls it Global 2.0, and then now we're in Global 3.0, post-industrial world of networking, where knowledge is the energy, no longer natural gas or oil. And the point is, you have different ways out of the crisis. One, we talked about this in the beginning, is global thermonuclear war. It's a possibility because, again, wars write off debts and responsibilities. You have a 4 or 3 or 2, whatever quadrillion dollar global debt. Just so people understand what that number represents. It's a 4 and 15 zeros. There's absolutely no way you can pay that off, ever. But wars can write that off. I know they're gonna kill half of the world's population or more. But as Mao Zedong said way back when, if they do that, our country is the biggest in the world. We have over 1 billion people. Now it's 1.5 billion. We will survive. Russia territorially will survive because we're the biggest country in the world. The United States will not survive. Europe will not survive. Latin America, nobody knows where that is. And Africa is what it is. Okay? So that's one of the ways out of the crisis. Another way out of the crisis is the change from the Atlanticism to the Pacific area of influence, which is what we're seeing right now. Because again, if you go back to 2012, what happened in 2012? Well, you have the WikiLeaks scandal, which is when Vatican lost their place at this global power table. They dismantled Vatican as, an independent representative or somebody who had a vote, let's say this way. Okay, you had WikiLeaks scandal, you had the pedophilia scandal, the Pope left, Benedict XVI, and the Jesuit priest became the new Pope, Pope Francisco. Okay, so one of the ways is global thermonuclear war. The second way is the change from the Atlantic area of influence to the Pacific area influence. The Rockefellers lost in 2012 against the Rothschilds. The Rockefellers are the bankers, the percentages, and the Rothschilds, they're changers. Be it drugs, natural ounces of gold and silver, diamonds, whatever it is you want. Changers. What does that mean? It means separating the world into regional territories, which is one of the things we talked about, and which is one of the things we talked about way back when, beginning shortly after the 9/11. I think it was like October 2001, when for the first time we prepared a report where we talked about dismantling of countries. We talked about Westphalia, dismantling countries and creating regional economic blocks. Now, for a regional economic bloc to work, you need a minimum population base. And that minimum population base is between 300 and 500 million people. So, for example, if you look at it, and this is very interesting, one area will be Canada, the United States, parts of Mexico, Australia, New Zealand. That'll be like a dollar region. The second region will be rest of Mexico and Latin America. That'll be like a peso, whatever you want to call it. The third region will be Paris, Berlin axis, and Western Europe. Okay, then you'd have China, then you'd have India, separate entities. Russia will be divided in two. Western Russia would join Syria, the Balkan countries, Turkey, Iran, and the Turkic-speaking former Soviet republics. And then the Eastern would go with Japan, the Koreas, Philippines, Vietnam, etc. And that would leave London, the British Empire. Okay, and that's what Brexit is all about. Because as you have the fight in the United States between the representatives of the different elite circles, it's not between the Republicans and the Democrats, okay? It's not between this, whatever her name is, Ocasio, I can't even pronounce her name. I don't care what her name is. That's absolutely irrelevant. I mean, she's qualified to sell tickets in a zoo. That's it, okay? But the point is, it's not between the Republicans and the Democrats, between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. It's between global projects. And so London, with Brexit, because they understood the collapse of the global economic model, Bretton Woods. And so they realized way back when they needed to do something about it. And their plan was to create a separate economic region with a golden dinar for them and for the Arab world. Arab world are the Sunnis and the Shiites, who don't get along since, Prophet Muhammad was in diapers. And the problem is for them, how do you get these two to actually get along and understand each other? You needed to offer them something on the platter. And that something was to be the head of Israel as a nation state. I'm not saying this. I don't want anybody to call me an anti-Semite. Henry Kissinger said it way back in 2012, and it was published in the New York Post, that Israel in 10 years was going to disappear. Jacob Rothschild, somebody who was very well informed, said the same thing. Now, the plan behind it is this.
Yeah, they'll be wrong about that, though.
They are, but for a different reason.
Okay, go ahead.
First step in the plan, you need to get rid of all these old leaders in the northern region of Africa who've been there for 30 years. Bouteflika's in Algiers, Gaddafi in Libya, Mubarak in Egypt, etc. And thus, you have the Arab Spring. The second part, you got to get rid of Turkey, because Turkey, they have their dibs through the Ottoman Empire on some of the same Arab countries that England, the British Empire, wanted to incorporate into the new region. They did that, okay, because Turkey is not allowed into the European Union. And the third step, again, as I said, get rid of Israel by joining forces. Now, the whole thing was already prepared. The only thing that was missing was for Hillary Clinton to become president of the United States. And she was all for it. But she lost. And Trump wasn't going to go for it. And thus, the empire created Plan B. And Plan B, and I explain it in my book, is Macron in France.
That's right, another Napoleon.
Who is a carbon copy of Napoleon III.
Yeah.
Now, the idea, and I'm going to go in because I know we don't have the time. The idea of Macron is to, the same with Napoleon III, is to push Germany into the hands of National Socialism, which is China, and Russia, which is today not a communist country, but liberal country, okay? And open the European market as a result of not being able to merge the Arab world into one union for themselves after Brexit. Now, today the situation is different because, yes, it's not going to happen because, again, why? Because Trump is not going to go for it. So what are London's choices? There are three, and they're not very palatable. One choice, they go begging on their hands and knees to Washington for alliance and help. But the guy who's sitting in the White House is their enemy. Thus, Steele dossier and all this other stuff coming out of London. The British Empire has always been the enemy of the United States and also Russia. Number two option, because Trump is out of the question because he doesn't want anything to do with these people, is go begging on their hands and knees to Berlin, because London understands they can't compete economically with Germany. Now, Germany is not going to let them go. They want them to pay for it. And what we're seeing right now is the pushback in the House of Commons in London. And the third option, as I said before, to come up with some kind of an idea where you can, hobble some kind of a thing together with the Chinese. And what we're seeing right now, and we saw it again in the year 2015, when Emperor Xi Jinping, because he's not a president, he's the emperor, went to London and met with the Queen and the entire delegacy of the Lords and made a deal that the goal, because again, remember, London are the Rothschilds. And the Rothschilds are a different team from the Rockefellers. The Rothschilds won. They're the exchangers. And so what we're seeing right now is all the gold moving from London to Taiwan and Hong Kong. Hong Kong are the Rothschilds. Taiwan and Singapore are the Rockefellers. Everybody's talking about China having 2,000 tons. China has 30,000 tons of gold. It's a reparation payment for all the stuff that was done to them by London back in the first and second Opium Wars. Because China could never have gotten that, hands on Hong Kong had it not been for the Rothschilds. And so what we're seeing right now, again, changing, or you have this global regionalization of economies, or you have change of the guard, the energy going from the Atlantic region to the Pacific region. And that's why the entire thing is moving right now to China. Another thing, I don't know if you saw a couple of days ago, they're talking about the negotiations between the Russians and the Japanese for the turn of the islands, which allegedly are Japanese that the Russians took from them as a reparation payment in World War II. It's a very important point. Okay, and I'll explain it and I'll stop because I know we're running out of time. Okay, what you're seeing right now, okay, Vatican is pushing Russia towards Moscow Third Rome, which means Europe, liberalism, etc. You have a group of people in Russia, okay, who want the recreation of USSR too. But the more logical solution, as I said before, is for Russia, China, Japan, the Koreas, and Mongolia to create the Northeast Economic Region, okay? And that's what they're looking at right now. And needless to say, the liberal banking financier circles do not want for this region to work, and that's why they're all up in arms saying that Russia shouldn't give up these islands, because what will happen is, again, it's a question of gold. I don't know if you ever heard the story of the Hirohito gold from World War II. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
The golden lily? Well, all that stuff that, allegedly it's all in the Philippines and Malaysia, it's all nonsense. Okay? All of that gold is on the island of Iturup. If you look on the map, these are the islands, right where Mongolia ends. That's where the Soviet Union's Mongolia. Japan ends and the Soviet Union, Russia starts back in the Far East. All that gold is there. And first, the Rothschild gold is now in China. Russia needs to solve one of three things. First, they need to understand and find Tsar Nicholas is the second goal, which is why all the stuff, looking for his remains, because what they found has nothing to do with his remains. Once they get his remains, they can get all that gold back from London.
So gold is big, it's going to be a big component with the New World Order.
Because we're seeing the end of the Bretton Woods. We're seeing the end of the petrodollar model. Because, again, Trump was elected president, and his mandate from the people behind him was dismantle petrodollar, dismantle that, and get rid of World Trade Organization. And what we're seeing Trump doing, he's going up against International Monetary Fund, he's going up against World Bank, G7. They're the enemies of Trump and the people behind him because they represent a liberal banking financier model.
Which is why he got us out of the Paris Climate Accord. Same
all
thing.
That stuff, again, you have to put it against the backdrop of the collapse of the economic model. It has nothing to do with ideologies. It has nothing to do with Donald Trump being an unpalatable president who was, bringing disrepute to the United States, as if the mainstream media ever cared about the United States as an entity. It's about control of the emission center. And because the model is now dead, they need an alternative model. And so they're looking at, just to summarize, or global thermonuclear war. And that's why you're seeing all that stuff in the Middle East. Again, remember, what's Trump doing in Afghanistan? What's he doing in Syria? He's done something that Putin hasn't been able to do. He's extricating himself out of that mess because he understands anytime, this thing can explode. Putin has tried on 3 occasions to get us, Russia, out of the Middle East. The first time he tried, we got in there in 2015. The terrorists, whoever they are, knocked out one of our airplanes over Sinai Peninsula. The second time he tried, the Turks, knocked out one of our fighter jets over their territory. So we haven't been able to extricate ourselves out of there, but Trump is getting out. And he understands why. The people behind Trump, who are all, again, the Trump's problem is he has no team because he is surrounded by traitors. Not because they're traitors in the United States, because they work for the liberal banking financier model. And so, it's remarkable what Trump has been able to do.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. The
Having
attacks.
the entire edifice of the global liberal structure against him, he's been able to maneuver as much as he has. And when people are saying in the United States, he's not doing enough, the wall, he's fighting on all the fronts and he is alone. And Putin has the same problem because Putin doesn't have a team behind him either. Because again, Trump and Putin can agree. They can talk to each other. They're both alpha males. Okay? But the problem is there's no one behind them to actually get things done because they're surrounded by the liberal banking financier crowd. And people are saying that makes no sense. He's the president. He brings his own team. No, he doesn't. You have the entire edifice of bureaucracy who's been there for generations, and they respond to the liberal banking financier orders, not to Donald Trump.
Let's talk a little bit about gold in the markets. Do the markets have to start with the markets? Does the stock market have to crash? Will it help Trump or hurt Trump? Does the stock market have to crash?
Well, it's a good question because, again, if you look at it as a nation state or if you look at it as a global project, because, you see, I don't look at things as nation states, meaning countries. Right now, you don't have countries. You have regional blocks. And for the liberalism, what they need, their joker, their card, is at any time they have this card available, they can collapse the markets. And when you collapse the markets, Trump needs to come up with an alternative economic model. Because if you don't, and you have no model, once the whole thing collapses, you go to war. Okay? And again, go back to what I said a few minutes ago, wars write off debts and responsibilities. Which is why we're seeing all this maneuvering. We don't know who is going to win. We don't know the end of the story. What we do know is why all this stuff is going on. Okay. Trump had several options. Well, now, one of the easiest thing for Trump to have done when he became president is to push the interest rates to 4, 5, 6%. That would have collapsed the entire global order, which are the enemies of Donald Trump. But then it's like we have a table, and you cut 2 legs off, the table collapses. But to make sure the table doesn't collapse, you need to, prop it up somehow.
Yeah, gotta be careful.
Which means Trump would have needed to come up with an alternative model, but they don't have a working model right now. They have regionalization of the world economies, which is what BRICS was all about. Remember, BRICS was an attempt to create this regionalization of global economies. And that's why, if you're looking at it right now, Brazil is now part of the American area of influence. You have, who else is there? You have the Chinese, you have the Indians. South Africa, well, it's black apartheid right now, so they're going to be probably thrown out on their ears, okay? And Turkey's probably going to be admitted into the BRICS. And Turkey, that's another, because again, it doesn't matter where you look globally. You asked me about gold. We're looking at changing of the guard from the Atlantic to the Pacific, okay? From petrodollar to physical ounces of gold, which is what the Chinese have a lot of. And so the new economic model, again, the separation of regions, make America great again, is going to the United States, shutting the door, saying to the rest of the world, go to hell. Okay? Well, that's what it is.
I don't mean to, I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at how succinct, which is what this book is. This is why people need to get this book. Very pointed, very succinct, doesn't get into a bunch of flowery crap. You go right to it. Boom, 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 boom. It's like you get done, it's like,
And the thing is that, just to finish what I'm saying about...
Go ahead, but gold, I'm going to finish your thing with gold. So is gold's going to be an important a component of whatever world we have, gold, silver, precious metals.
The thing is that it will be a very important component. Now, what needs to happen is the Chinese and the Russians can work together, but not right now, because today's Russia is liberal banking financier crowd. Putin is the only person who is internationally right-wing conservative, although nationally, this is dichotomy insanity. Okay, he's a liberal.
Got it.
Because just to give you an idea, you have 40% of people who are starving to death in Russia. You have 70% of Russians who experience deep, grave depression, which means 100 million Russians are in danger of dying. Our population is decreasing annually. It's 140 million. By 2030, it's going to go down to 122 million. That's as many people as we lost fighting Second World War against Nazis, who are going to die as a result of what we're seeing right now. Okay, you have 35% of Russians are alcoholics. This is modus operandi of the liberal banking financier crowd. They need to dismantle Russia because, economically speaking, again, if we go back to what we were before, okay, be it planned economy, whatever you want to call it, we have a better chance surviving than we have today. So for us to survive and work with China together, first thing we need to do, and that's why the Americans and the Chinese, for all the stuff that that they're fighting each other, and the Chinese are our best friends and they love us to death, it's all nonsense. Okay, Americans and the Chinese are working together to do what? Okay, to get rid of liberalism in Russia. Because until they eliminate liberalism, you cannot build a different society. And the only way that the Russians and Chinese can actually work together is you can get rid of liberal, because China is national socialism. Okay, words like socialism, capitalism, I don't know where people get these words from, because in China, they don't have words. They have hieroglyphs, which is visual representation. And if you look at the 8 hieroglyphs that you have in the Tiananmen Square, none of them say socialism, communism, or anything else. National socialism in China is the union of different clans separated by different colors, joint forces around the throne of the forefathers. That's what Chinese National Socialism is all about. But because people in the West don't read hieroglyphs, don't understand anything about Chinese culture, you hear all this nonsense of Chinese communist, Chinese socialist. It is not. It is National Socialism, which is why the Chinese and the Germans easily work together, and we're seeing it right now, okay, through the Silk Road.
What does the little guy do? What does the guy listen to this interview saying? What should I do? What's the best kind of thing that I could do? Do you plan on a collapse? Do you plan on a war? Do you plan on hyperinflation? Do you plan on a new dollar? What does the guy, the home gamer, guys like me, these dumb guys, what do we do? What does the guy watching this interview do? What's the best thing they can do?
The first thing you need to understand is you gotta back Trump. I don't care because again, Trump is not a person. I'm not a card-carrying Republican, member of the Republican Party. But people have to understand that our only way out of this is to make sure that Donald Trump actually stays president of the United States, because the entire welfare of Russia and everywhere else depends on non-liberal crowd winning. First. Second point, make sure you have physical gold and silver. Make sure you don't have paper gold, because when the markets go poof, that thing is going to disappear. Make sure you understand that all the noise you hear in the mainstream media, it's what it is. It's noise. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about, this latest stuff with some kids in Catholic school, or we're talking about some silly football game, or we're talking about what Trump did or said, whether he picked his nose at a birthday party, whether he looked at Putin, and, it's all nonsense. You got to look at a bigger picture from a conceptual point of view. And the conceptual point of view, the model which has been working since 1944, Bretton Woods, based on infinite growth, is dead. Or we come up with a new model, or we go to hell.
Daniel Estulin, you're going to send me the wherever you want me to get people to buy your book. You send me your links.
I think probably the easiest way. I mean, people can get it, via Amazon, but I also have copies, and if people are interested in a personalized signed copy, they can or email me at daniel.estulin.es@gmail.com, or they can get in touch with me via my Twitter feed, which is at Estulin, Estulin, Daniel at Estulin Daniel. They can follow me on Twitter. But again, the easiest way, if they want an autographed copy of my last book or any of my books, just send me an email, daniel.estulin.es@gmail.com. Or again,
how do they pay you for this deal?
Well, probably the easiest is PayPal.
Okay, easiest PayPal. Okay, well, you send me the links of how you want to do it, and I will do it. Fantastic book. I couldn't even get to just a small fraction of it, of this book. A fantastic analytical brain. Incidentally, your book got a 5-star review on Amazon. I just
Thank
think
you
I
so
bring
much.
that up. So anyway, you are no conspiracy theorist, conspiracy fact, deep intelligence ties. You're a PhD, a doctor in what, conceptual what?
Intelligence.
Okay, conceptual intelligence. Your monster books, 15-time published author, multiple time best-selling author, huge book, sold millions and millions of copies
Remember,
globally.
Greg, there's something else I wanted to.
Okay.
In the United States, my book is published by a wonderful, small but wonderful publishing house, Day and Chris Milligan. But globally, okay, my publishers are Random House, Penguin, Planeta, which is world's third biggest publishing group in Europe. So again, you don't get some peeps quick little publishing house in third world countries. I get Random House and Penguin publish my books
Oh,
globally.
you're a huge literary star. Come on, that's what I'm saying. You got multiple best-selling author. You've done it internationally. Daniel Estulin, again, the new book, a relatively new book, In the Shadows of a Presidency. Daniel Estulin, thank you for coming on
Wonderful, always wonderful to be on your show. Thank you.
thanks for taking us to school here on USAWatchdog.com. Very eye-opening interview. Thank you very much for coming on. And the links will be in the after the interview section for you people in YouTube. And thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it. Daniel Estulin, the author, best-selling, multiple international best-selling author of his latest book, In the Shadows of a Presidency. Daniel, thanks for coming on from Toronto.
Thank you so much.